When the world goes quiet, some voices still remain. Not every soul finds peace when the clock strikes 12. There are stories hidden in the shadows, whispers drifting between the living and the forgotten. Some stories linger, some souls don't leave. Welcome to Stillness After Midnight, where every silence tells a story. If you're drawn to the mysteries that stir after dark, the voices that echo when the world sleeps, subscribe now and join us as we listen to the souls who still have something to say, because in the stillness, the truth finally speaks. I remember the first time I heard about the mountain. It was not in a library, nor in any dusty archive where legends are often buried, but in a quiet bar in Kyoto, beneath the dim orange glow of paper lanterns. I had been traveling through Japan on a research sabbatical, chasing fragments of folklore for a book I hoped to write, a study of the intersections between place, memory, and haunting. I was not searching for ghosts, or so I told myself then. I was searching for stories. The man who told me was older, his hair white but his back unbowed, the kind of man whose presence seemed to come from another century. His English was halting, but his eyes sharpened with each word, as though the memory of what he described was etched deeper than language itself. He said there was a temple on the slopes of Mount Oiwa, a place once revered, now abandoned. Not safe, he told me, shaking his head. No priest, no visitors, only voices. I laughed politely at first, thinking it no more than one of those tales travelers trade to unsettle the gullible. But the way his hand trembled around his sake cup silenced my skepticism. He was not trying to entertain me. He was warning me. That night I returned to my ryokan and wrote the name of the place carefully in my notebook. Oiwa Temple, a forgotten shrine high in the mountains north of Kyoto, never marked on the tourist maps. I had studied folklore long enough to know that every whisper of superstition usually concealed some kernel of history. A fire, a crime, a betrayal. These were often buried beneath layers of ghost stories. I told myself that I wanted to see it only for research, to record the architecture, to trace the erosion of ritual in a country balancing reverence with modernity. But there was something else, an itch beneath my skin, a compulsion I could not quite name. The train carried me out of Kyoto the next morning, past the swarming arteries of the city, into the quieter veins of the countryside. The farther we traveled, the more the land seemed to breathe differently. Wooden farmhouses leaned against the hillsides, rice paddies mirrored the sky, and the mountains rose like silent witnesses, wrapped in drifting veils of mist. I had read about the way mountains are regarded in Japan, not merely as geological forms, but as realms where the human and the divine overlap. To climb a mountain was not only a physical act, but a spiritual crossing. Some mountains were sacred, others were feared. Mount Oiwa, I suspected, was both. At the final station, the conductor looked at me with mild curiosity when I asked for directions. Temple? He repeated, his brows furrowing, as though I had mispronounced the word. When I showed him the kanji I had copied from the old man's story, his expression darkened. He shook his head. No road, he muttered, and would say no more. Outside, the air was colder, the village smaller than I expected. A few shops lined the main street, their wooden signs swinging gently. The scent of miso and wood smoke hung in the air. When I asked again, a woman at a tea stall pointed toward the mountains with a single deliberate motion. Her eyes lingered on me, almost pitying, as if she were watching someone step onto a path from which they might not return. The trail was narrower than I imagined, more a deer path than a pilgrim's road. It climbed quickly, winding through cedar forests that rose like pillars, their canopies blotting out the sun. The silence was not absolute. There was wind, the rustle of unseen animals, but it was a silence that pressed upon the ears, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath my boots. With each step, I felt the distance from the world below. My phone lost its signal. The sounds of the village faded into memory. The air grew damp, and a faint smell of moss and earth clung to everything. I stopped once to rest beside a weathered stone marker. The characters carved into it were eroded, but I recognized the first. Enlightenment. The rest was illegible, worn away by time or perhaps by something less natural. It was then I began to feel it, the weight of being observed. It was not the gaze of a passing hiker, for there were none, nor was it the simple paranoia of solitude. This was older, heavier, as if the trees themselves leaned closer to listen, as if the mountain had opened an eye. I pressed on. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. I had lost my sense of time. When the forest finally broke, the sun was already sinking, pouring its last light across a clearing, and there, half shrouded in mist, stood the temple. At first glance, it seemed less a building than a shadow carved against the mountain. Its roof sagged beneath the weight of neglect, the curved eaves stretching outward like wings long broken. Vines clawed their way across the wooden beams, and the once red torii gate at its entrance was faded to the dull brown of dried blood. No sound came from within, no chanting, no ringing of bells, only the whisper of wind weaving through the empty corridors. I should have felt triumphant, having found the place others refused to speak of. Instead, I felt as though I had trespassed into a graveyard, uninvited. The silence here was not absence but presence, thick, waiting, listening. I approached slowly, my footsteps muffled by the moss-covered stones. The air tasted different, metallic, as though rust hung invisibly in it. I noticed how the mist pooled strangely around the building, clinging to it, refusing to disperse. I paused at the gate, my hand brushing against the splintered wood. A line from the old man in Kyoto returned to me. No priest, no visitors, only voices. And though the evening air was still, I could have sworn I heard something then. Not the wind, not the creak of timber, but a low murmur like the echo of chanting carried across water. It lasted only a second, then vanished, leaving me alone before the abandoned temple. Yet I was not certain I was alone. That was my first day on the mountain, and it was the beginning of something I have carried ever since. Something that followed me down from those slopes. Something that even now, as I write these words, whispers when the room falls silent. They say that journeys begin with footsteps, but mine began with a gaze I could not see and a silence that was far too loud. I crossed the torii at twilight. The last glow of the sun was fading behind the peaks, and the mountains seemed to exhale a breath of cold mist that clung to the stones. As my boots touched the threshold, a strange sensation passed through me, like stepping into water without getting wet. My chest tightened, and for an instant I felt I was not moving forward but downward, as though the ground itself had deepened beneath me. The temple grounds stretched wider than I had expected, courtyards connected by corridors of decaying wood. Lanterns, long unlit, swayed gently as if stirred by invisible hands. Stone statues lined the pathway, their features worn smooth, their eyes hollow with moss. I tried to take notes, but the pen trembled in my hand. My training as a researcher urged me to catalog every detail, the symmetry of the roof, the weathering of the stone, but my instincts resisted. There was a sense of trespass here, as though each word I scribbled was being read over my shoulder. The silence was unbearable. I had known silence in libraries and mountains, even in ruins, but this was different. This silence pressed inward, like a thick cloth held against the ears. It was the silence of something holding its breath, waiting for me to make the wrong sound. The main hall rose at the center of the compound. Its doors stood slightly ajar, as though the last monk who lived here had left in haste and never returned. The wood was blackened, not by fire but by age and weather. Cobwebs draped the beams like funeral shrouds. I pushed the doors open with both hands. The hinges did not groan. They moved too smoothly, as though they had been oiled recently. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. This place had been abandoned for decades, perhaps longer. So who tended to the hinges? Inside, the air was heavier. My lantern's light flickered across a floor, polished not by care, but by time itself, as if thousands of feet had worn it smooth. Tatami mats lay torn and rotted in corners, but the center of the room was bare, open, waiting. And there, presiding over it all, was the statue. I had read of such statues in temples before, but none compared to the presence of this one. Carved from dark wood, it towered above the altar, the figure of a monk seated in meditation. His robes were detailed with such precision that even the folds seemed to breathe. His hands were folded in mudra, his eyes half closed in eternal contemplation. But it was not serenity that radiated from him. It was something else, something that clung like the mist outside. The expression was too ambiguous, caught between compassion and sorrow, between forgiveness and accusation. I stepped closer. The lantern flame quivered violently as if protesting. The eyes of the statue were carved to appear shut, but from where I stood, I could swear there was the faintest glimmer, like pupils shifting beneath heavy lids. I told myself it was imagination, a trick of shadow. But the air around me grew colder, and a thin bead of condensation formed on the wood, running down like sweat on a living face. I backed away slowly, my notes forgotten. The side halls were no less unsettling. Rooms where tatami mats were rolled aside, where incense burners lay overturned, where scrolls had crumbled into unreadable dust. Yet in each room, there was an order beneath the decay, as if abandonment had not been chaos but ritual. One chamber contained nothing but sandals, dozens of them, lined neatly against the wall. Their cloth straps were frayed, their soles eaten by mold, but they were placed in pairs, each facing the same direction, waiting for feet that would never return. Another chamber held a low table, still set for tea, cups of porcelain, cracked but intact, a teapot with its lid off, empty, but without dust inside. I leaned closer and smelled faintly the ghost of green tea, as though it had been poured not long ago. That was when I began to hear it again. The murmur, soft, rhythmic, like a chant recited far away. I spun, lantern raised, but the halls were empty. The sound was not in the air. It was beneath it, woven into the silence. Each syllable slipped away before I could grasp it, yet I felt it brushing against my skin like fingertips in the dark. Outside, the mist had thickened. It pressed against the windows, curling into the cracks, swallowing the moonlight. The temple seemed to float, suspended in a sea of vapor. My reflection wavered in the glass, but it was not entirely my own. For a moment, the face staring back at me was older, gaunter, with eyes that burned too brightly. I staggered back, nearly dropping the lantern. When I dared to look again, only my own pale, nervous reflection remained. That night I decided I would not stay. I would leave before the mountain claimed me in whatever way it had claimed those before. But as I stepped toward the gate, the path was gone. The mist had swallowed it whole. The torii I had crossed hours ago was nowhere to be seen. Only the temple loomed behind me, waiting, as though it knew I had no choice but to remain. I found myself back in the main hall, though I could not recall walking there. The statue greeted me again in silence. My lantern sputtered, threatening to die, and in the brief flicker of darkness, I saw it, the monk's eyes wide open, gleaming in the shadows. When the flame steadied, they were closed once more. I told myself I was tired, delirious from the climb, but my heart knew otherwise. Something within this temple was awake, something that had been waiting for me. I sat against the wall, notebook on my lap, lantern dim beside me. Outside, the mist curled against the wood like a tide against a shore. Inside, the silence deepened, heavy as stone. And through it all, faint but steady, came the chanting. Closer now, as though it was not outside but within the very walls that surrounded me. I do not know if I truly slept that night. If I did, it was the kind of sleep that feels more like drowning. Half conscious, pulled beneath heavy water, Every time my eyes closed, I would hear the chanting again, low and endless, wrapping itself around my thoughts until even my dreams were not my own. When I woke, the lantern had gone out. The mist pressed against the windows, pale and luminous, as though the moon itself had dissolved into it. For a moment I did not remember where I was. And then I saw the silhouette, the great statue seated at the far end of the hall, its form so vast it seemed part of the mountain itself. I told myself it was just wood, carved centuries ago by human hands, but my body did not believe. My body trembled as though it recognized something older, something watching. I lit the lantern again, the flame coughing to life. The room brightened in a weak amber glow. The statue's face flickered in and out of shadow. Its eyes were closed, or nearly closed. Yet from where I sat, I could swear the angle had changed. I rose slowly, the floor creaking beneath me. Each step echoed louder than it should have, as if the silence were amplifying my trespass. I circled the altar, inspecting the figure. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Even weathered by time, the wood seemed to breathe. The folds of the robe caught the light as though woven from fabric rather than carved. And then I saw it, a hairline crack running across the eyelid, so thin I might have missed it. From within that crack, the faintest glint, like the gleam of a wet stone beneath water. I leaned closer, holding the lantern high. My own reflection stared back at me from that slit of darkness. For one unbearable instant, I saw not wood, but the unmistakable curve of an eyeball, moist and alive, shifting beneath the carved lid. The lantern shook violently in my hand. When I blinked, the slit was gone. Only polished wood remained. I stumbled backward, breath ragged, heart hammering. My rational mind demanded an explanation. Condensation, illusion, exhaustion. Yet the air in the hall had changed. It was heavier, charged like the sky before a storm. I turned to leave, but the sliding doors of the hall would not move. They had opened easily the night before. Now they were as solid as stone. I pushed until my shoulders ached, but they did not yield. The temple was holding me inside. Defeated, I returned to the center of the hall. My notebook lay where I had dropped it, pages fluttering though there was no wind. I bent to pick it up, and froze. Someone had written on the page. Not in English, not in my own hand. The ink was black, the strokes unmistakably Japanese. 3 characters only, sharp and deliberate. I recognized enough kanji to know their meaning. Zui, sin. Ligiri, betrayal. Shi, blood. The lantern hissed. My hands shook so violently that the notebook fell again. When I snatched it back up, the page was blank, as though nothing had ever been written. I sat rigid in the shadows, waiting. I do not know how much time passed. Hours, perhaps. The chanting continued, always just beyond clarity, always at the edge of hearing. And then, without warning, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. It pressed on my chest, thick as stone. I lifted the lantern once more, my gaze drawn inexorably to the statue. This time there was no mistake. Its eyes were open. 2 dark orbs stared down at me, glistening wetly in the lantern light. Not the lifeless stare of a carving, but the heavy, knowing gaze of something that had endured centuries of silence and had now chosen to see. My knees weakened beneath me. I wanted to run, to claw open the doors, to fling myself into the mist outside. But I could not move. The eyes held me as surely as chains. And then, the lips. No, they did not part, but the wood shifted subtly, as though shaping words unspoken. My ears heard nothing, but inside my skull, a single thought bloomed, cold and absolute. You do not belong here. I do not remember collapsing, but I must have. When I awoke, dawn had broken. The mist had thinned into pale ribbons drifting between the cedars. The doors stood open again, as if they had never resisted me. The statue was as it had been before. Eyes closed, silent, motionless. I staggered outside, gasping as though I had been underwater. The mountain air was sharp and clean, yet it did not wash away what I had seen. My notebook still lay in my lap, blank pages accusing me with their silence. I should have left then. I should have descended the mountain and never looked back. But something within me had shifted, just as the statue had. Curiosity had become compulsion. Fear had become tether. The temple had opened its eyes. And I knew, whether by chance or by fate, it had opened them for me. I thought I was alone on the mountain. After that night, the statue's gaze, the words that were not words, I believed no human soul could dwell here. Yet as the morning light bled pale across the mist, I saw him. He was seated on the stone steps outside the main hall, as though he had been waiting for me. An old man, thin as a branch, his back curved but unbroken. His hair was white, cropped short like a monk's, and his robe was the color of old ash. He held a staff across his knees, and when I approached, he did not startle. He merely raised his eyes to mine, dark and sharp, like embers that refused to die. "You came," he said in Japanese. The words were quiet, but they carried with them the weight of inevitability. I answered in broken phrases, the little I knew of the language, then switched to English, unsure if he would understand. To my surprise, he did, haltingly, but with a clarity that unsettled me. "This place," he said, "is not for the living." His voice was neither kind nor cruel. It was the voice of someone who had repeated the same warning too many times, knowing it would not be heard. I asked him who he was. He did not give a name. He did not call himself a monk nor a caretaker. He only said, "I remain because others cannot leave." The way he spoke the word "others" made the air grow colder. I pressed further, perhaps too eager, perhaps too desperate to find an explanation. I asked about the chanting, the mist, the eyes of the statue. His gaze sharpened, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from deeper than his lungs, he tapped his staff against the stones. "You have seen too much already. The mountain has noticed you. The temple has opened its eyes. Once that happens, the path down will not be simple." He rose to his feet, slowly but with a steadiness that belied his years. He walked ahead and I followed, uncertain why. He led me around the outer halls to places I had not yet explored. There were gravestones there, hidden behind moss and creeping vines. Dozens of them, some so old their inscriptions had dissolved. The old man paused before one stone, its surface cracked. "Here," he said softly, "the last abbot lies." I bent closer, trying to trace the faint characters. The name was unreadable. Only one word I recognized: innocence. The old man's face tightened. "Innocence," he repeated. "That was their crime, to be innocent when others demanded guilt." I felt the words strike me, though I did not understand them. He seemed to sense my confusion, but he did not clarify. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the mist, where the temple loomed like a ghost. "They burned what they did not understand," he whispered. "They condemned what they feared. And now their voices echo. The smoke never leaves." I shivered, though the morning sun had begun to warm the stones. His words did not feel like metaphor. They felt like memory. I asked him if he had seen the statue move. His eyes darted sharply toward mine, and for the first time I saw fear in them. "Do not speak of that," he hissed. His voice, though frail, cut like steel. "Once you name it, it listens more closely. It waits for acknowledgement." His hand gripped the staff tightly, the knuckles pale. "Close your eyes when you pass it. Do not return to the hall after nightfall. Do not answer." The last word lingered in the air, heavy and deliberate. We sat together on the steps as the day unfolded. The mist thinned, the cedars swayed gently, and for a moment it seemed as though this place might be no more than an old ruin with too many legends. I almost believed it. But then I noticed something. The old man's shadow. It did not fall as mine did. The sun was behind us, yet his shadow stretched in the wrong direction, bending subtly toward the temple as though tethered to it. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and it seemed to right itself. But the image remained burned into me. He caught me staring. Slowly, deliberately, he smiled. "You will not leave," he said, as though it were not a prediction but a law. When I asked why he stayed, his answer chilled me. "I am bound," he said simply, "as you will be." I wanted to protest, to deny, but the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I asked what bound him. He looked toward the statue's hall, his lips pressed thin. "Guilt binds me," he said at last. "Not my own. Theirs. The ones who turn prayer into betrayal. The ones who force silence into the mouth of truth." He did not explain further. Perhaps he could not. Perhaps he feared what might listen if he did. As the sun dipped low, he stood, leaning on his staff. "Night comes," he said. "Return to the hall. Stay inside. Whatever you hear, do not follow it." I wanted to ask where he would go, but before I could, the mist rose suddenly, swallowing the steps. When it cleared, he was gone. Only the imprint of his staff remained in the damp earth. That night I could not rest. His words replayed endlessly. Do not answer, do not follow. And yet when the chanting began again, deeper and closer than ever before, I felt a compulsion rising within me, a pull like the tide against the shore. The temple was not only watching me now, it was calling, and I feared even then that one night soon I would answer. The old man's warning haunted me as the day fell into shadow. Do not answer, do not follow. Yet the words themselves carried a paradox. If I had not been meant to hear, why had they been spoken at all? Why warn me unless he knew I would be tempted? The sun bled into the horizon, staining the mist a color that was neither dusk nor dawn, but something in between. The temple grew darker long before the sky did, as if the walls themselves rejected light. I lit my lantern and placed it beside me in the main hall, trying to convince myself that the glow was protection. But protection from what? For a time there was only silence. I sat cross-legged, notebook open, pen hovering uselessly above the page. I wanted to record my impressions, to shape them into research, but the language of scholarship seemed obscene here. Words like architecture or folklore did not belong in this hall. And then it began, a sound, soft, low, rhythmic. At first I thought it was the old man outside, reciting sutras in some forgotten vigil. But no human throat produced that vibration. It was not a voice but a chorus, layered upon itself, like waves rolling over one another without end. The chanting seeped through the wooden beams, through the floor beneath me, through the very air. I could not identify the words. They shifted, syllables folding in on themselves, dissolving before I could grasp them. But the cadence was unmistakable. It was prayer. Prayer meant for no God I knew. The lantern sputtered. Shadows lunged across the room, stretching unnaturally long, like ink spilled over the floor. The statue loomed at the far end, its eyes mercifully closed, or perhaps simply waiting. I tried to ignore the chanting, to focus on my breath, but it pressed into my skull like a tide against a cliff. My heartbeat began to align with it, slower, heavier, until I could no longer tell whether I was listening or participating. I clamped my hands over my ears. It made no difference. The sound was not external. It was inside me, vibrating in my bones. And then I realized it was not only chanting. Beneath it, faint, like an undertone, there were footsteps, wooden sandals clacking slowly against stone. I dared to glance toward the corridor. There, in the pale shimmer of mist that crept through the doorway, a figure moved. Not clearly, never fully, just the outline of robes brushing the floor, the sway of a sleeve, the glint of what might have been prayer beads swinging. The figure did not advance into the hall but lingered in the threshold, half born of shadow, half of vapor. Every instinct screamed to call out, to ask if it was the old man, but his warning returned to me. Do not answer. So I remained still, silent, watching. The figure did not approach. It did not vanish. It simply stood, as though waiting for me to make the mistake. The chanting grew louder. The lantern flared, then dimmed, then flared again, struggling against some unseen breath. My throat was dry, but my tongue burned with questions I dared not ask aloud. At last, I could bear it no longer. I rose to my feet, notebook clutched to my chest and back toward the opposite wall. The floor was slick beneath my soles, as if damp with unseen condensation. The figure shifted, only slightly, but enough that I saw the curve of its head, the slope of shoulders hunched in endless penance. And then, just for an instant, I heard words, clear among the chanting. "Why did you not save me?" I froze. My skin turned to ice. That voice was not the old man's. It was younger, rawer, frayed with grief. The corridor was empty again. Only mist swirled there, curling in patterns that resembled faces if one stared too long. My body shook uncontrollably. I wanted to scream, to break the silence with sound of my own, but fear held my jaw shut. Instead, I stumbled back to the statue. It towered over me, silent, inscrutable. Its eyes were closed, and yet I felt it listening. I fell to my knees, pressing my palms to the cold floor, as though pleading with it. "What do you want?" I whispered, unable to stop myself. The chanting ceased. The silence that followed was not relief. It was suffocation. The air congealed, thick and oppressive. My lantern went out. In that absolute dark, I heard it again. The footsteps, this time inside the hall, slow, approaching. Each step struck in perfect rhythm with my heart. I wanted to open my eyes, but terror sealed them shut. I knelt in the dark, body rigid, while the steps circled me once, twice, and then stopped. Something hovered just behind me, breathless, waiting. And then a hand brushed my shoulder. I screamed, leaping to my feet. My eyes flew open, desperate for light. The lantern flared back to life without my touch, casting the hall in its wavering glow. There was no one, only the statue, silent, unmoved. But my shoulder burned with the unmistakable impression of fingers, cold, damp, pressing deep. I could no longer pretend this was imagination. The temple was not merely haunted, it was alive. I did not sleep again that night. I sat with my back against the wall, lantern clutched in white-knuckled hands, until the first pale strands of dawn crept through the mist. With daylight, the temple looked as it always had, ruinous, empty, abandoned. But my body remembered the touch. My ears remembered the voice. And deep within me, something whispered a truth I had not yet dared to accept. The chanting was not prayer, it was accusation. Sleep, when it finally came, did not feel like rest. It descended not as a soft curtain, but as a trap door, dropping me into a place that was neither night nor day. I remember lying on the thin mat in the ruined chamber, the dawn barely risen. My body trembled with exhaustion from the previous night's ordeal. Yet when my eyelids closed, I had no sense of drifting. Instead, I was seized, and when I opened them again, I was somewhere else entirely. The temple stood whole, not the sagging ruin I had entered, but a pristine sanctuary. Its beams shone with fresh lacquer, red as living blood. Lanterns glowed along the veranda, their paper skins swaying gently in a wind I could not feel. The air smelled of cedar, smoke, and something faintly sweet, incense thick enough to choke. And there were monks, dozens of them. They moved through the courtyard with bowls and staffs, their sandals clacking softly, their robes whispering against one another. Their faces were blurred, indistinct, like painted masks left in the rain. Only one figure stood out. At the far end of the courtyard, a young monk knelt before a great wooden pyre. His robes were plain, his posture rigid. He did not move, did not speak, but I felt his presence as surely as if a hand had closed around my throat. The chanting began again, but here, in this dream, it was not distorted. The syllables were sharp, resonant, echoing through the courtyard. Namu Amida Butsu. Namu Amida Butsu. The invocation of the Buddha of infinite light. Words I had encountered in text but never heard with such force. The monks formed a circle around the pyre. Their blurred faces turned toward the young man. The chanting grew louder, urgent, and the young monk rose. He stepped onto the pyre with the calm of someone taking their place in a ceremony long rehearsed. He folded his legs, sat in lotus, and closed his eyes. His lips moved in silent prayer. Flames bloomed at his feet. I tried to cry out, but no sound left my throat. I rushed forward, desperate to tear him away, but my body would not move. I was not participant, only witness. The fire rose quickly, unnaturally quick, engulfing him in orange and black. His face did not contort, his body did not writhe. He sat motionless, swallowed by the inferno, until the flames consumed all trace of him. The chanting reached its crescendo, and then silence. The monks turned their heads toward me, and though their faces were still blurred, I knew with absolute certainty what their eyes demanded. You will remember. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The temple was dark again, though the hour was midday. My body shook as if I had run miles. I told myself it was only a dream, the natural result of exhaustion and fear. But when I raised my hand to my face, I smelled smoke. The scent of burnt wood lingered in my hair, my clothes, my very skin. And that night, when sleep claimed me again, the dream returned. Each time it was the same, the courtyard whole, the circle of monks, the young man at the pyre, the fire, the silence. But with each repetition, small details sharpened. I began to hear the whisper of his last prayer. I saw the shape of the sutras etched into the wood of the pyre. I caught glimpses of his face, not fully, never clearly, but enough to know he was young, barely older than a boy. And always the same unspoken command burned itself into me. You will remember. On the third night, something changed. As the flames engulfed him once more, the young monk opened his eyes, and this time, they locked onto mine. The world around us dissolved. The monks vanished. The chanting cut off mid-syllable. Only the fire remained, and in the center of that fire, the monk spoke. His lips did not move, yet I heard him. They betrayed me. The pyre collapsed. Sparks erupted into the dark, 1,000 tiny stars. And I woke screaming, the sound echoing in the hollow temple, startling even the birds from the trees outside. By now, I no longer believed these were dreams. They were memories, but not mine. Memories forced upon me, woven into my sleep until I could not separate my own thoughts from his. Each repetition wore me thinner, carving his agony into me like scripture into stone. I avoided the statue during the day, but even in avoidance, I felt its eyes behind their lids, pushing me toward the truth it demanded I learn. The old man had warned me, but his warning was useless. The mountain had already chosen me. I began to fear sleep more than waking. Yet no matter how I resisted, walking the halls, scribbling frantic notes, drinking bitter tea until dawn, slumber always came, and with it, the fire. The same pyre, the same monk, the same death. Over and over, until I no longer counted the nights but the repetitions of his burning. And each time, as the flames devoured him, his voice grew clearer. You will remember. They betrayed me. Find the truth. By the seventh recurrence, I could no longer deny what the temple demanded. This was not haunting for the sake of torment. This was testimony, and I, unwilling, unprepared, had become the witness. Morning came pale and indifferent, yet I felt no relief in its light. My body was restless, my mind frayed. The dream had etched itself into me so deeply that when I blinked, I could still see sparks of fire drifting in the air, as if embers lingered on the edges of reality. I told myself I must search for answers, though I did not know what form those answers might take. To remain idle, waiting for night to claim me again, was unbearable. So I turned to the statue. The Buddha sat in silence at the heart of the hall. Its stone face was smooth, its lids sealed in an eternal half-slumber. The surface was weathered by centuries, yet when I approached, I felt something beneath, as though the stone itself breathed. I had avoided touching it until now, but desperation outweighs reverence. With trembling fingers, I pressed my palm against the cold chest of the statue. A jolt shot through me, not physical, not pain, but a sudden swell of presence, the same presence that haunted my dreams. And then I noticed something. Beneath the lotus base, where moss had grown thick, a crack had opened. I knelt and scraped gently at the moss. The stone yielded, revealing a narrow panel that looked almost deliberate, a hidden compartment fashioned long ago. With effort, I pried it open. Inside lay a bundle, wrapped in cloth so tattered it fell apart at my touch. Within it, sheets of rice paper, browned and brittle with age. The ink had faded, but the characters were still visible. I carried them to the doorway, where the light was strongest, and began to read. The script was archaic, but my studies had prepared me for such forms. These were no ordinary sutras. They were confessions, records, words left behind by a desperate hand. The first sheet began abruptly. "Forgive me, merciful Buddha. Forgive the sins that are not my own. They accuse me, though my heart is clean." The handwriting was hurried, uneven, as though written in fear. Another passage. "The elders envy me. They twist my teachings. They say I defiled the vows. But I did not. I only sought truth. Their eyes burn with suspicion. They whisper that I must be cast out." The more I read, the more my hands trembled. The words spoke of betrayal, of false charges. The writer, a young monk, had been condemned by his own brothers. And then came the final entry, scrawled with strokes so fierce the paper tore. "They prepare the pyre. They call it sacrifice, but it is murder. If my ashes remain, let them bear witness. If these words survive, let them speak the truth they try to erase." I lowered the pages, my chest tight, my breath unsteady. The dream had not been a dream at all. It was history forced upon me. The young monk I saw burning had been real, his suffering preserved not only in memory but in these desperate words. The chanting, the fire, the silence. It was all part of a ritual, but twisted, corrupted into execution. I sat in the hall for a long while, the papers spread around me like fallen leaves. Outside, the wind moved through the cedars with a sound like distant weeping. At last, I turned back to the statue. Its expression had not changed, yet in the dim light, I imagined a subtle shift. Its closed eyes seemed to press heavier, as though straining to remain shut against truths too terrible to see. I whispered aloud, though I knew no one would answer. "Is this why you haunt me? To carry your story beyond these mountains? To give voice to what they tried to silence?" The silence pressed in, and then, from somewhere deep within the stone, a crack, a sound soft but undeniable. I nearly stumbled backward. The statue remained intact, yet I could not shake the certainty that it had moved imperceptibly, as if its own stone heart had shifted under the weight of revelation. Clutching the papers to my chest, I retreated to the veranda. The sky had darkened with heavy clouds, though the day was not far advanced. The air carried the scent of rain and something harsher, like burnt cedar. The old man appeared again. He emerged from the mist at the edge of the steps, leaning on his crooked staff. His eyes, sharp despite the sagging flesh around them, fell to the bundle in my hands. "You read," he said simply. His voice carried neither accusation nor surprise. "Yes," I admitted. My own voice cracked. "It was all written down. He was innocent. They murdered him." The old man nodded slowly, as though this was no revelation but a truth long understood. The temple could not bear its shame, so it buried the sin within itself. The stone remembers, the fire remembers, and now you remember. Now, his words chilled me more than the wind. Why me? I demanded, almost in anger. Why show me, a foreigner, a stranger to this land? The old man's gaze lingered on me with something like pity. Because the dead do not choose as the living do. The burden falls where it will, and now it falls upon you. The clouds thickened overhead, and a rumble of thunder rolled through the valley. I clutched the papers tighter, though part of me wanted to cast them into the storm, to be free of their weight. But deep within, I knew freedom was no longer possible. The monk's last words had branded me. If these words survive, let them speak the truth. I had become that survival, his witness, his vessel, and the mountain would not release me until I carried the truth to its end. That night, as darkness crept over the ruined temple, I laid the papers beside my mat. I dared not close my eyes, yet sleep claimed me anyway. And when it did, the dream returned. The courtyard, the pyre, the chanting. But this time, when the fire rose, the young monk's gaze met mine again. And though his lips did not move, I heard him clearly. Now you know. Sleep seized me, despite every effort to resist it. The ancient pages lay scattered beside me, like withered petals, as though even in rest they whispered to be read again. And then the dream, no, the memory, drew me back into the courtyard of fire. The scene unfolded with greater clarity than ever before. The air was heavy with the stench of oil, sharp and acrid, clinging to my throat. The chanting of monks encircled me, their voices cold, methodical, as if reciting a sentence rather than a prayer. At the center, bound in coarse rope, stood the young monk. His head was shaven, his robe torn at the shoulder, exposing skin already marked with bruises. His eyes, however, remained calm. They searched the crowd with quiet defiance, meeting my gaze across centuries. A senior monk stepped forward, his staff striking the stone with a hollow sound. He was stern, his expression carved from iron. His voice, deep and commanding, cut through the chanting. He has broken the vow. He has corrupted the Dharma. He has brought shame upon this temple. The fire shall cleanse what cannot be purified. The young monk's lips parted, and though his voice trembled, it carried with remarkable strength. I have broken no vow. I sought only to question what was taught, to walk closer to truth. You fear me not for sin, but for your own shadows. His words hung in the air, but the circle of monks did not falter. Their chants swelled, drowning him. I wanted to shout, to protest, to reach out, but my body remained frozen, a silent witness imprisoned in time. The senior monk gestured, and attendants came forward with torches. Their flames hissed as they touched the oiled wood stacked beneath the prisoner. The fire caught quickly, leaping upward in greedy tongues. The young monk did not scream at first. He closed his eyes, bowing his head as though already at prayer. For a brief moment, the fire lit his figure like a halo, a saint framed in ruin. But the flames grew merciless. His body writhed against the ropes, smoke billowing around him. His voice, when it broke, was not of agony, but of accusation. "Betrayers," he cried, "you twist compassion into cruelty. This temple shall know no peace while my spirit burns." The chanting faltered for the first time. Faces turned uneasy, shadows wavering in the firelight. And then, with a final surge of strength, he raised his gaze skyward. "Let my soul remain. Let my suffering linger. Until truth is seen, may this fire never die." A sound tore through the night, half scream, half vow, and the flames roared higher, consuming him. The monks recoiled, shielding their faces from the sudden blaze. The pyre seemed to burn beyond natural fuel, an inferno that seared itself into the very stones of the courtyard. I saw his form collapse, yet in that instant, I also saw him rise. his figure no longer bound, but towering, a silhouette of fire and grief. Eyes aflame, mouth sealed in silence, he looked at me, and the world shattered. I woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat. My hands clawed at the mat as though to tear away invisible ropes. The papers beside me fluttered in the draft that had slipped into the hall, though every door was closed. For a long moment I could not move. The echo of his vow reverberated in my skull. Until truth is seen, may this fire never die. When I staggered to my feet, I saw the old man standing at the threshold once more. He had not entered, yet his presence filled the hall. "You saw," he said softly. Not a question, but a statement. I nodded, words lodged in my throat. "He was not guilty," I finally whispered. "No," the old man replied. "But innocence does not shield against envy, nor truth against power. His brothers condemned him to preserve their order, and so the temple was cursed, not by demons, but by its own betrayal." His eyes narrowed, sorrowful yet unyielding. "The fire you saw has never gone out. It burns still, in the stone, in the wind, in the hearts of those who wander here. You carry it now, as he willed." The storm outside broke at that moment. Rain lashed against the roof, thunder rolled across the mountains, and the air within the temple seemed alive with unseen voices. I clutched the bundle of papers tighter, though I knew they were only remnants. The true record was etched not in ink, but in suffering, in the unquiet spirit that roamed these halls. That night, as I tried once more to rest, I kept the lantern burning beside me. Its flame flickered violently with every gust, shadows quivering across the Buddha's face, and I thought of the monk's final cry, his vow that his soul would linger until truth was known. Was I chosen to be the one who carried it forward, or merely another witness doomed to repeat his memory, as countless wanderers before me must have done? I did not know, but one thing had become clear. The death of the monk was not an end. It was the beginning of the haunting, and I was now bound to it. I had thought I knew what fear was. The visions of fire, the monk's death, the whispered chants in the night. These had shaken me, yes, but nothing prepared me for the storm that descended upon the mountain the following night. The day passed in uneasy silence. The sky grew darker hour by hour, as if twilight had arrived far too soon. From the veranda I could see black clouds gather, their bellies swollen, bruised like rotting fruit. The valley below vanished beneath veils of mist, and even the cicadas fell quiet, as though the world was holding its breath. By evening, the first drops of rain struck the roof with hollow metallic notes. I sat by the lantern's glow, the papers of the young monk spread before me, though I could no longer focus on the words. My thoughts drifted ceaselessly back to the vow, the burning, the voice that promised eternal unrest. It was then that the old man appeared once more, silent as shadow. "You must not stay through the storm," he said, his voice barely rising above the first rumble of thunder. "Why?" I asked, though the answer was already written in the unease of his face. "Because the storm calls to him. When wind and fire meet, when rain strikes these stones, the boundary weakens. You will not know dream from waking, nor life from death." I wanted to leave, I truly did, but a strange compulsion anchored me to the floor. "If I go now," I whispered, "the truth dies with me. Is that what he wanted?" The old man's expression wavered, a flicker of pain crossing his eyes. He did not answer. Instead, he bowed his head, turned, and vanished into the mist as though the temple itself had swallowed him. By nightfall, the storm had arrived in full. Rain lashed at the doors like fists. Wind screamed through the eaves. The lantern quivered on the table, its flame bending nearly sideways, yet somehow it did not extinguish. I closed my eyes and told myself I would simply endure, just endure until morning. But then I heard it, the sound that split the storm in two, the chanting, not distant this time but immediate, pressing against my skull. Voices, dozens of them, intoning sutras with cold precision. I rose and staggered to the doorway. The courtyard lay awash in rain, yet through the sheets of water I saw them. Silhouettes of monks, their robes plastered to their thin bodies, their heads bowed. The pyre stood once again in the center, its wood dry and unburned despite the deluge. Atop it stood the young monk, bound once more, his eyes open and fixed directly on me. "No," I whispered, clutching the frame of the door. "I've seen this. I know how it ends." Yet this time something was different. The monk did not wait in silence. He spoke to me, his voice louder than the thunder, though his lips hardly moved. "You carry my memory. You have seen betrayal. Now you must feel it." The ropes dissolved into rain, and he stepped down from the pyre, walking toward me. His eyes burned, not with fire, but with grief so profound it hollowed me. The monks around him did not react. Their chanting grew louder, shaking the ground, until I thought the stones themselves might crack. I stumbled backward into the hall, but he followed, leaving no footprint, no ripple of water. Inside, the Buddha statue loomed, its face half lit by lightning. For an instant, I thought the eyes glistened with tears. "You would flee," the monk's voice echoed, though his mouth remained closed. So did I. But there was nowhere left to run. He raised a hand, and suddenly the walls around me dissolved. The hall stretched into darkness, infinite, without pillars or roof. Only rain and chanting remained. And then, I was no longer myself. I felt ropes at my wrists. I felt the sting of oil against skin. I tasted smoke in my throat. The storm outside became the storm within, every drop of rain a coal upon my flesh. I screamed, not with my own voice, but with his. The pyre blazed up again, though no spark had been struck. I looked down at my hands, and they were his, thin, trembling, blackened with ash. Around me the monks chanted, their eyes like hollow shells, empty of compassion. And I knew I was not merely witnessing, I was inhabiting his death. Every breath seared, every heartbeat thundered. The agony was not of flesh alone, but of betrayal, of the crushing realization that his brothers, his family and faith, had condemned him. The storm outside roared in unison with my cries. I collapsed, or perhaps I burned away. I cannot say which. The world twisted, bent, and when my vision cleared, I was once again in the hall. The monk stood before me untouched by flame, his expression unreadable. "Do you see now?" he asked. I could only nod, tears mingling with the rain that had somehow followed me inside. "Then you understand why I cannot leave, why I linger." His voice broke, and for the first time I heard not anger, but weariness. All I wished was to teach kindness, and for that I was silenced. "Tell me, would you forgive?" The question struck deeper than any flame. My mouth opened, but no answer came. How could I, who had never borne such betrayal, offer words of release? The monk regarded me silently, then turned. The chanting ceased. The pyre vanished. The hall was whole once more. Only the storm remained, its fury unrelenting. I fell to my knees, gasping, drenched, trembling with a cold that came not from rain but from sorrow. Somewhere beyond the thunder, I thought I heard the old man's voice carried on the wind. "Endure, until dawn, endure." I clung to those words like a lifeline, though I knew dawn would not end the haunting. Dawn would only draw me closer to the heart of it, for I was no longer an observer. I was bound to the storm, and the storm was bound to him. The storm did not end with the night. When the first gray light of dawn crept over the mountain, I found no comfort in it. The rain had slowed to a cold drizzle, but the clouds hung low and heavy, pressing against the earth like the weight of memory itself. My body ached as though I had truly been burned, every nerve raw, each breath unsteady. I remember clutching my notebook, though the pages were warped and half ruined from water. I tried to write, but my hand shook so violently that the words became little more than scratches. Perhaps that was fitting. What words could capture what I had endured? By midday, silence settled over the temple again. Not the peaceful silence of a shrine in the mountains, but a silence thick with expectancy, as though something watched and waited. That was when the old man returned. He did not knock. He did not announce himself. He simply appeared at the threshold, his straw hat dripping with rain. "You are still here," he said, his tone neither approving nor condemning. "I saw him," I whispered. "Not only that, I lived him. I felt his death." The old man's eyes closed. "Then you have been chosen." "Chosen?" He nodded slowly, as though the word cost him strength. "He has waited for someone willing to carry the weight of his truth. The monks who condemned him left no record. The villagers who whispered never knew. The truth rotted here, unspoken, until it poisoned the very stones." I wanted to protest, to insist that I was no priest, no medium, only a traveler with an unfortunate curiosity. But deep within, I knew resistance was meaningless. The monk had already marked me. What is the truth?" I asked. The old man looked past me, toward the great Buddha statue at the hall center. "Tonight he will tell you himself. Be ready, do not run." And then, without another word, he turned and vanished into the mist once more. I waited. Dusk crept in, smothering the ruined temple in shadow. The lantern at my side flickered, its glow frail against the growing dark. I could hear the wind rustling the trees, but no thunder, no storm, only anticipation. And then I felt it, a chill, subtle at first, then spreading through the floor, the air, my very bones. The lantern's flame bent inward, as though pulled toward an unseen breath. He appeared not as fire, nor as a bound figure upon the pyre, but as a man. The young monk stood before me, his form pale, translucent, yet undeniable. His robe clung to him as if still damp with rain. His face bore neither anger nor serenity, but something heavier, an exhaustion older than centuries. "You have seen my death," he said, his voice quiet yet resonant, echoing in every corner of the hall. "Now you must hear my life." I could not speak. My throat closed. I simply bowed my head as if before a master. "I was not a saint," he began. "I was young, foolish perhaps. I entered this temple with a heart eager to serve, but also eager to question. I read sutras and I asked, why? I swept the stones and I asked, who benefits? I believed truth was not to be obeyed, but to be sought." His voice wavered, like the smoke of incense. The abbot did not agree. He saw questions as rebellion. My brothers saw doubt as poison, and when misfortune fell upon the village, when crops failed, when sickness spread, it was easy to point to me, the questioning monk, the restless one. He paused, and in that pause I heard the faint sound of chanting return, low, mournful, as though the temple itself remembered. They said I had defiled the rituals, that my doubt invited demons, that my presence cursed the harvest. And so, in the name of purity, they bound me. In the name of faith, they struck the spark. The monk lifted his hand, and though no fire appeared, I smelled smoke. My skin prickled with phantom heat. "Do you know," he asked, his eyes piercing mine, "what burns worse than flame?" I shook my head, trembling. "Betrayal," he said simply. "To watch brothers with whom I had shared rice and prayer step forward with torches. To hear the abbot recite verses not to guide me to enlightenment, but to condemn me to ash. That is the fire that has never gone out." His voice broke then. For the first time I saw not the ghost of a wrong soul, but the shadow of a man, a boy even, crushed by loneliness. "I begged," he whispered, "not for life, for understanding, for even one voice to say, perhaps he is not guilty." No such voice came, not even from the villagers who ate the rice I had carried to their doors. He sank to his knees, hands pressed together, as if still in supplication centuries later. And so I vowed, if no one would remember my innocence, I would remain. If no one would carry my truth, I would carve it into the stone of this place, until even the wind repeated it. The silence that followed was unbearable. The weight of his words pressed upon me, as though the walls themselves were bowing inward. At last I forced my voice to emerge. "But what do you want of me?" The monk's eyes lifted, and for the first time they softened. "Not vengeance, not worship, only witness. Speak of what you have seen, write of what you have felt. Let the world know that my fire was not justice, but cruelty." My chest tightened. "And if I refuse?" His gaze hardened once more like embers beneath ash. "Then the storm will return, again and again, until mountains crumble, until your line ends, until someone at last listens." A shiver coursed through me, not only of fear, but of recognition. I had already been claimed. There was no refusal left in me. The chanting swelled suddenly, filling the hall. I turned expecting to see monks once more, but the shadows remained empty. The sound came from nowhere, from everywhere, vibrating through the wooden floor into my bones. The monk's figure began to fade, his outline dissolving like ink in water. "Tomorrow," he whispered, his voice almost lost in the rising drone. "Tomorrow you will help me. With him." "Him?" I asked, desperate. The monk only inclined his head toward the courtyard, where the old man sometimes appeared. And then he was gone. I collapsed against the cold stone, clutching my notebook, though I could not feel the paper beneath my fingers. My ears rang with the echo of that one word, witness. I was no longer a traveler, no longer merely curious. I was a vessel, and vessels must be filled. The night after his confession, I could not sleep. The monk's words clung to me like smoke, seeping into my lungs, staining every breath. Even with the lantern burning low, the shadows seemed thicker, pulsing with an unspoken demand. "You are mine now." By dawn, the old man returned. He came silently, carrying nothing but a bundle wrapped in cloth and a small bronze bowl that glimmered with tarnish. His eyes looked hollow, as though he too had not slept for centuries. "It is time," he said. I could not muster the strength to argue. I only nodded, though my heart pounded in protest. We set to work in the courtyard, the same space where the pyre once roared and consumed the monk. The earth there was scarred, blackened in patches where grass refused to grow. The rain had ceased, but the air was damp, and every breath carried the bitter taste of char. From his bundle, the old man withdrew objects one by one. A length of red cord, a small drum with skin worn thin, sticks of incense, thick and twisted, their scent sharp even unlit, sheets of rice paper covered in characters written by hand, each stroke trembling with age. He handed me the cord. "You will tie it around the Buddha's hand. The knot must not fail." "Why me?" I asked. "Because he chose you." The words left no room for further questions. When the preparations were complete, the old man lit the incense. Thick smoke curled upward, white at first, then darkening, swirling as though alive. He began to beat the drum slowly. Thump, thump, thump. Each strike echoing through the ruined halls, reverberating in my chest like a second heartbeat. "Do not speak," he whispered. "Do not move until I tell you. If you falter, he will not pass on. He will consume." The smoke thickened, curling into shapes I could not name. The scent was overpowering, sweet, then sour, then acrid, as if each breath carried me deeper into another realm. My eyes stung, my skin prickled. And then the chanting began. It was not the old man's voice. It was not mine. It came from everywhere. The walls, the stones, the very air. Low at first, a hum, then rising into syllables I did not recognize but somehow understood. Ancient verses, sutras twisted by pain, yet aching with longing. In the center of the courtyard, the smoke coiled tighter, condensing into a figure. The monk once again. But unlike before, his body was no longer pale and flickering. He seemed heavier, more real, as though the ritual had drawn him closer to flesh. His eyes fell on me. "This is the night," he said, his voice both sorrow and command. "The fire that bound me must now be undone. The witness must release me." The old man struck the drum faster, his voice rising into a chant of his own, words I could not follow but that shook the earth beneath us. He gestured for me to step forward. My legs obeyed against my will. "Place your hand upon him," the old man ordered. I hesitated, but the monk extended his arm, and something in his gaze, a plea, a demand, pulled me forward. My hand met his skin. To my shock, it was not cold. It was warm, trembling, alive. Images flooded me at once. His childhood in the temple, sweeping stones with small hands. His laughter with fellow novices, sharing bowls of rice. His questions, sharp and unyielding. His terror as ropes tightened around his arms. The searing agony of fire. The screams swallowed by chanting. I gasped, nearly falling. But he held me steady, his hand gripping mine. "Do not let go," he said. "If you let go, the fire returns." The old man's chant grew louder, rising like a storm. The incense flared, and for a moment, the courtyard became both past and present. I saw monks in saffron robes circling, villagers watching in silence, torches blazing against the night. I smelled flesh. I heard crackling wood. Yet within it all, the monk's voice pierced through. "I am not cursed, I am not impure. I was a man who sought truth." He trembled as he spoke, as if even now, centuries later, he doubted the right to say it. I found myself speaking, though the words felt foreign on my tongue. "You were innocent." The chanting stopped. The air shuddered. The smoke froze in place, then scattered as if blown by a great unseen wind. The monk looked at me with eyes suddenly wet, glistening not with flame, but with release. "To hear it spoken," he whispered. "At last, it is enough." His grip loosened. His form began to fade, not in violence, not in agony, but gently as mist dissolves in sunlight. The old man struck the drum one final time, and the sound echoed into silence. The monk bowed his head to me, and then he was gone. The courtyard was empty. The incense burned low. The scarred earth seemed lighter somehow, as if the blackened soil itself exhaled. I fell to my knees trembling, tears I did not know I held streaming down my face. The old man placed a hand on my shoulder. His skin was as frail as paper, but his voice was steady. "You did it. He is free." But his eyes, hollow and dark, betrayed something else. "No spirit leaves without a cost," he added softly. "And you have carried him. Some part of him remains in you now." That night I slept for the first time since coming to the mountain. Yet in my dreams, I still heard the drum. Thumb, thumb, thumb. As though it was not ending, but only beginning. When I awoke, the air was still. No sound of drums, no whisper of sutras, no flickering shadow at the edge of my sight. Only the faint chirping of morning birds in the pale light of dawn bleeding through the mist. The temple courtyard looked different. The blackened earth, the cracked stones, the broken beams, they were still there. Yet there was a softness, as though the mountain itself had exhaled. The suffocating weight that had pressed upon me since my arrival was gone. The old man stood at the gate. He looked smaller somehow, his back bent, his face drawn with exhaustion. But in his eyes there was something I had not seen before. Peace. "It is done," he said. "You may leave." I gathered my few belongings. As I passed through the halls of the ruined temple, I noticed things I had not before. Small details. The way the wood had once been painted in bright vermilion, now faded to ash. Carvings of lotus blossoms along the beams, worn nearly smooth by centuries of wind. It was as though the place wanted me to remember it not as a prison, but as a sanctuary once alive with devotion. And then I saw the statue. The great Buddha, half shattered, still sat in the main hall, but its face had changed. Where once I had seen eyes that opened, heavy with judgment, now they were closed, serene, the lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile. I stood before it a long while. Was it truly stone, or had I witnessed something real? The old man appeared at my side. His voice was barely more than a whisper. He is gone, but his memory will remain. The mountain remembers everything. We descended the stone steps together. The mist lifted slowly, revealing the world below. Valleys veiled in morning light, the roofs of villages glinting faintly, rivers gliding silver through the land. For the first time, I felt the mountain as it must have been centuries ago, pure, silent, eternal. At the foot of the stairs, the old man stopped. "This is where we part," he said. I asked him his name. He only shook his head. "My name does not matter. I was only a keeper. The mountain will choose another when I am gone." And without waiting for my reply, he turned and walked back into the fog. His figure dissolved, as though he had never been there at all. The journey back to the village was dreamlike. The path seemed shorter, the forest less oppressive. People in the village greeted me with cautious smiles, though their eyes flickered with curiosity. They asked nothing. Perhaps they already knew in their own way what had happened. That evening, I boarded a train bound for Tokyo. As the countryside blurred past, I stared out the window, my mind heavy yet strangely clear. I told myself I would write about this someday, not as a story of superstition, but as history, as testimony. And yet, as the night fell and my reflection deepened against the glass, I saw something that froze my blood. The faint outline of the monk's face, watching me through my own eyes. Weeks later, back in the West, I resumed my work. I gave lectures, published articles, told colleagues of my travels. But never once did I speak of the mountain. Not truly. Some things resist translation. Some truths corrode when placed under the cold light of reason. Yet the silence haunts me. At night, when sleep finally comes, I dream. Always the same dream. The temple courtyard, quiet under the moon. The Buddha statue, whole once more, its eyes closed. And then slowly they open, fixing upon me as though waiting. And from somewhere deep within, I hear the drum again. Thumb, thumb, thumb. A heartbeat that is not mine. I sometimes wonder, did we release him? Or did we only move his burden into me, a vessel far from home? The mountain may have been cleansed, but I will never be free. Thanks for watching the whole video. Please give me a like and subscribe to the channel to watch more interesting stories.